This week on Crossroads Politics.
We're in the midst of our short session and we've hit the ground running.
Lawmakers are back to resume the 2026 legislative agenda. From housing costs to electric bills, they lay out their agendas. Plus,
that's something from a grade B horror movie.
We're looking at the bill that would let Indiana execute death row inmates with a firing squad. Plus, is this the year Indiana legalizes marijuana? Will lawmakers, veterans, and the White House come together to get it done? And growing protests. The fallout after an ICE agent shoots and kills a mom in Minneapolis. As an Indiana senator squares off with the president over military action in Venezuela. All that and more on this week's Crossroads Politics. Thank you for joining us on Crossroads Politics here on WTHR+. I'm Jenna Webster, in for Dustin Grove. We are back for the new year, and of course, so are the Indiana lawmakers. After an unusually early start for the failed redistricting push, lawmakers are moving on to all the other business they need to tackle in the 2026 legislative session. Nikki Kelly, editor of the Capitol Chronicle, is back too. She'll join us in a few minutes to help break it all down. But first, let's head out to the State House, where reporter Emily Longnecker to get a sense of what to expect from the rest of the session. Emily.
Hey, Jenna, you know, House Republicans released their legislative agenda on Thursday that they said lowers costs for Hoosier families and also cuts down on government bureaucracy. Democrats also released their legislative priorities this week that also focuses on lowering the cost of living for Hoosiers. The difference is on how both sides think that that should happen.
House Republicans believe it starts with four main priority bills. The first focuses on expanding Indiana's housing supply, which Republicans say will drive down housing costs. One way the bill proposes to do that is with rolling back some local zoning controls. The bill would also increase state oversight of local housing decisions. House Bill 1002 focuses on the cost of electricity. That bill expands low-income support and oversight of utility programs. It also encourages utilities to improve their service and cost to customers with ways to measure the quality of service. The bill also creates multi-year rate plans.
How quickly do Hoosiers get their lights turned back on when an outage occurs? That matters, right? It matters it's really a life safety issue. So when we look at that, we're also looking at affordability. That will be the new metric that we have worked with our stakeholders trying to create.
House Democrats also offered a plan this week for lowering the cost of utilities.
Let me remind folks that 2025 saw the highest increase in rates and utility bills. And one thing that we can do right off the bat is say, you know, we're going to suspend the sales tax on utilities. It's something that the same amount of reduction that we give to data centers and things like that. So that's just something that real quick.
Also in the Republican House agenda is a bill that would cut down on some regulations for K through 12 schools. They also have a bill that would consolidate state boards and commissions that have the same duties, and they say they're doing that in the name of efficiency. Of course, Democrats pushed back on those two bills, especially asking how that saves taxpayers money or lowers the cost of their utility bills. Jenna?
Yeah, really no surprise that we're seeing this lowering cost. That was something Democrats repeatedly pushed kind of during this redistricting discussion. Emily, we'll check back in with you in a few minutes. We do want to turn to Nikki Kelly, editor of the Indiana Capitol Chronicle. Thanks for being back with us this year.
Thanks for having me.
So let's start first with the agenda. Were there any surprises for you?
Yeah, I think they really focused on affordability. The only surprise on that is maybe federally Democrats were making that an issue and Republicans were trying to say, you know, we're all the costs are coming down, inflation's coming down, it's fine. Whereas statewide, you know, they're looking at the costs of utilities, the costs of housing. So I think that's good for Hoosiers if we can see some relief in those areas. So I think they've definitely listened to their constituents on that matter.
Yeah, I mean, utility bills is something that we have heard so many people talk about right now. There were definitely a lot of similarities in some aspects of these agendas between the Democrat and Republicans. So do you think maybe there's some room to work together on both sides of the aisle?
Yeah, I think on these types of issues, there are definitely some room to work together. I mean, Democrats are going to want to go further than Republicans, but I think, you know, they would still support some of the efforts that would, you know, rein in some of these costs. It's just that maybe the Republicans aren't going to go quite where the Democrats want.
So was there anything that you expected to see on the agendas but has not made it on?
No, I think we knew coming in that we had an abbreviated timeline and that they would probably only throw out 3 or 4 key items. Interestingly, the Senate Republican caucus put out theirs. They only have like 1 bill they're pushing. So the House Republicans are actually a lot, maybe even a little more substantive than I expected.
Well, we've got a lot more to get to, so we're going to check back in with you and break down all of these key issues. But we want to turn to, if you've ever had a medical procedure that required you to be unconscious, you might want to take a listen to this story. A new proposed bill wants to limit what can be done to you while you're sedated. So Emily, what is this all about?
Yeah, well, Jenna, at the heart of this bill are the questions, what is allowed to happen to you during a medical procedure after you've gone under? And right now there is no law in Indiana that expressly prohibits doctors or medical students from doing a medical procedure on you that you didn't agree to before going under. Take a listen.
The bill's author, Republican State Senator Mike Crider, says it's about protection for doctors.
So essentially, the bill is trying to protect medical providers and others from getting in a situation where somebody feels like a procedure has been conducted on them without their consent.
Crider says the bill also protects patients. If Senate Bill 90 becomes law, it would become illegal in Indiana for doctors, including medical students, to perform a rectal, pelvic, or prostate exam while a patient is sedated, unless the patient has said it's okay first.
I have had countless individuals come to the State House and ask to please pursue this. The reasons being is many people wake up and they find out that they've had these tests and they are traumatized.
Democratic State Representative Carolyn Jackson has filed the same bill during the past 5 legislative sessions, but says her bill never got a hearing. Jackson told Wednesday's Senate committee she's glad to see this bill moving forward.
The reality is physicians, residences, they don't know what kind of trauma these individuals have had in their lives. And when they found out a whole team of students have performed test after test on them, they are extremely emotionally upset.
The bill also received support from the Good Trouble Coalition, a grassroots public health and advocacy organization that focuses on improving health policy.
These should only be done by the care team for the benefit of the patient. This care team can and should include medical trainees when appropriately supervised.
20 states already require patients before going under to sign a consent form dealing with intimate exams. Federal guidance requires written consent before performing these exams for educational and training purposes. Senate Bill 90 would bring Indiana in line with that guidance.
And SB 90 passed unanimously out of committee by a vote of 12-0. It now heads to the full Senate for a second reading where lawmakers can offer other changes. Jenna?
Yeah, definitely a big development after it was 5 past legislative sessions that this did not get hearing. Emily, thanks. Nikki, this is kind of one of those bills when people talk about it, they are surprised to hear it isn't already illegal. So as we mentioned, it has failed several legislative sessions already. So do you expect it might have more success this time around?
I think so. The only concern I've heard about it is very slim in the matter of making sure doctors have freedom in an emergency situation. I mean, sometimes when you've gone under for a surgery or something, something can change and there becomes an emergency situation, and if they need to, change their movement or their plan. But other than that, I think it's pretty intuitive. I think a lot of people would have already expected that to be the law. And frankly, while it might not be the law, it's probably already covered under, doctor rules and regulations.
Mm-hmm. Is that concern you mentioned something that you think might end up in writing in a full bill before it passes?
I don't know. I mean, they could always just do one sentence saying, barring emergency situations, just to give them a little bit of flexibility if the plan before sedation somehow has to change because of a complication in a surgery.
All right, Nikki, thanks. We've got so much more to get to, so let's take a little tease look at what's coming up.
Essentially, the mayor would take over all death investigations.
Coming up, a proposal to end elections for hundreds of positions across Indiana. The big questions about that constitutional amendment. And could Indiana legalize marijuana? after the president moves to reclassify the drug, how veterans and lawmakers are coming together with high hopes. But first,
there is no perfect execution method.
Are you serious? This isn't the 1800s.
Will Indiana use firing squads for executions? The fight over the death penalty enters a new round at the State House next on Crossroads Politics. Welcome back. Criminals sentenced to death in Indiana may get a choice about how they're executed now. Two bills filed this session propose using a firing squad. Now, one of them already had a committee hearing this week, right, Emily?
Yeah, the committee that heard this bill this week, they didn't vote on it, which would have moved it forward in the legislative process. They just heard testimony on this bill, but a vote could still happen. The bill's author, Republican State Senator Mike Young, told me that some suggestions were made in committee, some suggestions for changes, and he plans to make those first.
As it stands right now, executions in Indiana are carried out through lethal injection. The last one took place last October. That's when the state executed Roy Lee Ward, who was convicted and sentenced to death for raping and murdering a 15-year-old girl. But state officials, including Governor Braun, have acknowledged the limited supply of the drugs used in lethal injections, in part because of the drug's cost and short shelf life.
And so our backup is, if they choose to do it, if they can't get the chemical, is by a firing squad.
Young's bill, Senate Bill 11, proposes using a firing squad as another option and giving the person who's set to be executed a choice on how they'd like to die. Right now, 5 states use firing squads. What still needs to be worked out in Young's bill is how the firing squad would work, how many people would be on it, and whether some of the guns would fire blanks.
We're not going to tie their hands to it. We'll say, here are your options.
Well, the first thing you have to ask when you're looking at these bills is, are you serious? This isn't the 1800s. What is Indiana doing thinking about killing prisoners by firing squad?
That was the reaction Robert Dunham said he got from his Lyft driver Monday when Dunham told him he was headed to the Indiana State House to testify about Young's bill. Dunham is the director of the Death Penalty Policy Project and teaches death penalty law. He says an Indiana jury hasn't imposed the death penalty since 2013. Right now, there are 5 prisoners on death row in the state. Dunham also pushed back on the idea that the proposed law gives prisoners a choice.
It's macabre to say to somebody, we're going to kill you, but we're going to let you decide how we're going to do it. That's something from a grade B horror movie.
Clearly, some lawmakers do not agree with that last thought there expressed by that gentleman. There's also a bill in the House dealing with executions. It would allow for executions from a firing squad or lethal gas. That bill would also give prisoners a choice of the methods. Right now, that bill has not been scheduled for a committee hearing. Jenna?
Yeah, this is going to be a very interesting topic as it continues this legislative session. We know that South Carolina was the first state in 15 years to execute someone by firing squad back in March. Emily, thanks. Nikki, I want to bring you in on this because we know state leaders, including the lieutenant governor, have floated this idea in recent sessions. So are you surprised at the pushback that the bill saw?
No, I think, we knew that anti-death penalty advocates would clearly come out against this, and they did. I would expect some sort of alternative gets through the legislative process. The cost of the pentobarbital is pretty high. They had spent more than $1 million on that for the first 2 executions we've recently done. We did a third one buying several more doses, and they have refused to tell us how much they paid for that. So, it's very expensive and hard to get, and several of the doses have just expired, not used, so it's also kind of wasteful. So I wasn't surprised by much of the testimony, and I do think some sort of alternative will move through the system.
Well, and we mentioned that, we've seen this in South Carolina this year. Do you think that's a reason why it's coming up in Indiana now?
Yeah, and that's also the other bill in the House has something called nitrogen hypoxia, which has been used in a couple states. That one's pretty controversial too. So, I think they're looking at all the options on the table that might withstand the constitutional scrutiny of cruel and unusual punishment.
Do you think Senator Young will try kind of again to get this bill through?
Oh, sure, and it's not dead. I mean, they took testimony. Lots of bills take testimony 1 week, and they'll come and do some amendments and vote it out the next week. So we'll see how it goes in the next few weeks.
Are there any changes that you expect to see? I know Emily mentioned that he had maybe some ideas from committee for changes to make. So what do you kind of anticipate for this?
I mean, there were some thoughts about how the firing squad would be set up, whether the rifles would be in fixed position or, on the shoulder. I mean, those are pretty detailed. I think we first need to get over the philosophical discussion of allowing them, period.
Mm-hmm. You were talking a little bit earlier about kind of the cost. So do you expect lawmakers to want to do something about the cost and difficulty of executions?
Yeah, I mean, that's what this bill is. I mean, they can't control the cost of the drug or how to get it, and so this is the other option. It also has a secondary help to the federal government. We obviously have the federal penitentiary in Terre Haute, and while federal law uses lethal injection, they have some flexibility in the law that says if they can't get that drug, they're allowed to use any method that's already legal in the state where the prison is. So if Indiana would approve firing squads, that means the federal government would be able to use them in Terre Haute as well.
Okay, interesting. A lot of ramifications for what this could mean. Well, execution isn't the only topic lawmakers are considering changing. They also may make an exception for some Hoosiers to avoid being on juries. Now, Emily, specifically, we're talking about new moms here, right?
Right, that's right. Breastfeeding moms in the first year of their baby's life. This is Senate Bill 139, and it has two authors, both Republican state senators, Stacey Donato and Blake Dorio, and both testified before a committee this week about why they thought that this was an important exemption. But it was actually a woman who is nursing right now. Her baby is 9 months old. She was able to speak from personal experience because she got called for jury duty just this week, and she was able to testify before the committee about why she thought this is a very important exemption.
Emily Weiner told a Senate committee Wednesday when she got called for jury duty earlier this week. She told them she had a 9-month-old baby.
I informed the court that I was a nursing mom and would be needing to be given accommodations to pump, and ultimately I was selected for the jury.
Weiner said over a 10-hour day, she was only given one chance to pump, and because of that, got a clogged milk duct that was not only painful, but took 2 days to get rid of.
This is not hypothetical. This happened literally this week.
Weiner asked lawmakers to support Senate Bill 139, which would allow courts to excuse a woman from jury duty if they gave birth in the past year, are breastfeeding, and request an exemption. Under the bill, the exemption is optional, not automatic. Under current Indiana law, jury exemptions are very limited, with people 75 years and older allowed to ask to be excused. According to other testimony, 22 other states currently have laws exempting breastfeeding moms from serving on a jury. Weiner says Indiana should become another one.
Moms deserve better, and we're trying to provide for our babies, and it's not that we don't want to do our civic responsibility. It's just that we have other things like feeding our babies that is just going to not be conducive with the whole judicial system.
And Senate Bill 139 passed out of committee unanimously by a vote of 10-0. It now heads to the full Senate for a second reading. Jenna?
I'm sure a lot of moms could be paying really close attention to this one. And Nikki, I want to bring you in on this because we heard Emily mention it. Indiana has these really restrictive exemptions for jury duty. But with this unanimous committee vote, do you expect this bill to have success as it moves through to a full vote?
Oh, I think the bill will fly through. I do want to caution, though, that I'm not sure the practical impact of it, because it's not a mandated exemption. It says the judge can exempt, which the judge already can exempt someone. I mean, I've been in courtrooms where people come in for not just breastfeeding, but I have a sick kid at home, and they'll immediately say, okay, you can go home. So we already have a system where the judge can exempt them for that. The bill simply codifies that, but it doesn't require a judge to exempt, which I think limits the effectiveness of the bill.
Maybe more something that judges kind of need to be understanding a little bit more what these moms are going through type of thing.
Yeah, maybe it's a kind of a statement without taking away their flexibility, but I think we're already practically in that situation now. A judge is free right now to exempt any mom who calls up and says, or gets in the jury box and says, I'm breastfeeding. They're free to exempt them right now.
So Emily mentioned that there are 22 other states that have a law like this. Why do you think Indiana hasn't up until now?
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I think in general, breastfeeding has become a lot more acceptable and encouraged in recent decades. And so we are often kind of sometimes behind the curve on some of that. So hopefully they'll catch up.
Going to be a very interesting story to continue to follow. Nikki, thanks. All right, more to get to. Still ahead.
On a local level. With all due respect to the federal level, we do need to make sure that our local agencies are involved.
But that's not what happened. How the feds are freezing out state investigators after ICE agents shoot and killed a woman in Minnesota. And the 2026 election is officially underway as candidates begin filing. How Democrats are launching a push for rural Indiana voters. But first,
it's not a gateway drug. If anything, it's a gateway to a better quality of life.
Will Indiana legalize marijuana? It's a big question right now. Veterans and lawmakers push for change after a presidential executive order. Next on Crossroads Politics. Welcome back. For years, advocates have been pushing for Indiana to decriminalize marijuana, or at least medical marijuana. 42 states, plus the District of Columbia, have legalized medical marijuana. And a recent move by President Donald Trump is giving advocates hope Indiana will join them. And Emily, it's veterans leading the way in this, right?
Yeah, that's right, Jenna. For years, a group of Hoosier veterans have pushed for medical marijuana to be legalized here in Indiana, saying that cannabis helps them with some of the after effects from their service, their military service, effects like PTSD. For years, though, Republican leaders here in the state have pushed back against that idea, reminding folks that marijuana is still illegal at the federal level, despite the neighboring states around Indiana decriminalizing it. But then last year, you had President Trump signing that executive order to reclassify marijuana. So Jeff Staker, with a group, Hoosier Veterans for Medical Cannabis, has proposed creating an Indiana Compliance Commission. Take a listen.
They never seem to get any traction, and we've seen that in the past. And with the governor's first year in office, I really didn't push the issue last year and didn't see us moving forward until federal intervention. And and the governor said we're not going to move until the feds do something. And well, the Fed has done something, and now it's time to move.
The Veterans Group has pushed the importance of legalizing medical marijuana to improve veterans' lives so that they don't have to take some of the psychotropic drugs they say they've been prescribed by the VA. And some of those veterans, including Staker, were here at the Indiana State House this week delivering a letter to Governor Braun, encouraging him to sign an executive order, to create an executive order to create this commission. Now, during the 2024 elections, Governor Braun seemed open to the idea of some form of legalization of medical cannabis, and since the legislative session got back underway this week, 2 marijuana bills have been introduced. House Bill 1191 was introduced by Democratic State Representative Mitch Gore, who represents parts of Indianapolis. Under his bill, cannabis possession of under 2 ounces or less would be decriminalized. House Bill 1298 was authored by Republican State Representative Jim Lucas. He's been a longtime supporter of decriminalizing marijuana. His bill would match President Trump's decision reclassifying marijuana in a way that would allow medical prescriptions. One thing neither bill does is set up a regulatory agency to look at the cannabis industry in Indiana. That's something that neighboring states have in place. As far as next steps, both bills have been referred to the House Committee on Courts and Criminal Code. So far, the committee has not scheduled a hearing for either of them, but House Speaker Todd Houston was asked yesterday if he thought marijuana would be a discussion this session, and he said he didn't think so. Jenna?
Emily thinks going to be a lot of eyes on this one, I think, especially with Houston's comments on that. Emily, thanks. Of course, this has been a fight that has been going on for years. Leadership in the General Assembly and, at least in the last administration, the governor's mansion, have used federal drug law as their reason not to legalize. So, Nikki, I want to ask you, with President Trump's executive order, do you think lawmakers will actually do it this year?
I don't. Leadership doesn't seem on board. And while it is a significant move by the Trump administration, it's still illegal under federal law. So just declassifying it doesn't make it legal federally. And that's always been the concern with a lot of Republicans, is they don't want to legalize something here that is still illegal federally.
Well, Ford is a Democrat. He's pushing for decriminalization of small amounts of marijuana. Lucas, on the other side, is a Republican, pushing for a more limited path. So do you think Ford's bill kind of dead on arrival here?
Yes. Was it Ford or Gore? But regardless, yeah, especially because the Democrat offered it, and unfortunately they have very slim chances of getting a hearing. And actually, one other thing that the House Speaker said yesterday, Todd Houston, was they are going to try to move on this Delta 8 issue, because there was some movement federally to clamp down on Delta 8. And so, I mean, theoretically, that's going the opposite way of cannabis legalization.
As Emily mentioned earlier, neither bill really includes a regulatory agency to deal with these post-legalization issues. So do you think that is something that needs to be fixed, that needs to happen before any type of bill can pass?
Yeah, I mean, I think if they legalize it, they'll create a commission and a whole structure. But I'm not sure what the purpose of having a commission is before they've actually have enough people on board to legalize it.
Is there anything that you think, I guess, needs to happen before it can be legalized? Anything that, these people who are pushing for this to be legalized, these veterans, in their eyes, what is something that can be done to kind of get this over the finish line?
Well, as I mentioned before, I mean, the fact that it's still illegal federally is a big issue. It seems like they're inching that way as well. I think, maybe in a few more years you could get enough lawmakers on board for medical, but probably not recreational.
All right, well, a lot of legislative stuff going on this session. But while the 2026 legislative session is already getting underway, we've got to talk about the 2026 election. Starting Wednesday, candidates for state and federal elections can now file their intention to run. That includes Republican State Representative Craig Haggard. He was there bright and early to file to run for Indiana's 4th Congressional District. He currently represents State District 57. Haggard says he's focusing on continuing his work at the State House while preparing for his next challenge.
There's going to be a lot of late nights, talking to a lot of people, keep doing what I've been doing, work this session till it ends, hopefully at the end of February, and then just spend every waking moment trying to run for the seat, talk to people in the district, and kind of grow that grassroots.
Haggard is running to replace Congressman Jim Baird. He and his wife were hospitalized this week after a crash in Washington, D.C. You see that picture right there. They were released from the hospital on Wednesday, the day Haggard filed. So, Nikki, it's not really been a secret that Haggard was planning to run for the seat. We've talked to him about it. But do you expect Baird to run for re-election?
I mean, that's all the indications we have right now are that he will run for re-election. Obviously, I think they're recuperating and trying to recover from this accident. The filing deadline is February 7th, I believe. So, but I expect him to run. If not, the conventional wisdom is that Representative Bo Baird, his son, would take up the mantle and run anyway.
Yeah.
Well, we'll run instead. But
February 7th, we still got a lot of time to see candidates filing.
Weeks.
Speaking of Haggard, he's been a very outspoken supporter of redistricting. Do you expect that to come up during the primary, and how do you think it might impact him if it does?
Oh, of course. Redistricting is going to color a lot of races. And some of the first day filings we saw were, we had Senator Greg Walker, who had said he wasn't seeking re-election. He was a redistricting opponent, and he already has a House rep trying to take his Senate seat. He changed his mind and filed. So he will be now facing a House rep for his state Senate seat. So redistricting is all over so many of these races, both at the state and federal level.
Why do you think that is?
I mean, it was just a massive, discussion, and it really is being used to I guess, pinpoint whether you support President Trump or not. I mean, you could support him on 99 other things, but if you didn't support him on redistricting, some Republicans, are using that as a reason to call others rhinos, Republicans in name only, or whatever. It's really become quite a litmus test.
And it was interesting during these redistricting hearings, we heard a lot of Republicans say, I do support President Trump, I do support his agenda, but I do not support him.
Correct. And, they knew when they made those votes that they would probably end up getting primary opponents, and we're definitely seeing those happen, mostly from the right against the right. So, but also there are some Democrats who are using redistricting in their plans to file too.
And we're going to talk about this so much more because nearly 30 people filed to run for state office this week. They're all part of the Indiana Rural Summit Coalition, representing what they call the largest group filing in recent history. They're running for both House and Senate seats, representing rural areas and small towns, areas they say are often overlooked in state politics.
At the very end of the day, here's what they're giving voters: a choice. And that to me is the most important thing, because in many of these counties, we have gone time and time again, election after election, without really having any choices on the ballot.
The largest town in my district is Nashville, which is under 1,000 people. So when we talk about rural southern Indiana, we have a lot of forests. We have Yellowwood National Forest, Brown County State Park, Hoosier National Forest, Lake Monroe. We are a area that is very rural, and those are the things that are important to us. We want to maintain our environment, all of our public resources, and those are the things that we talk about.
The coalition candidates will also share resources like technology and joint events during their campaigns, which is kind of interesting. But Nikki, rural Indiana, historically a very Republican stronghold. So what do you think is prompting this move by Democrats?
Yeah, I think they're trying to take advantage of the sort of stirring up of emotions on redistricting and target some races that might not traditionally have been seen as competitive, hoping to, stir the base up a bit and get them out to the polls.
Is there any reason that, to believe that this is going to be more successful than past Democratic efforts to flip these seats?
I mean, it seems like they're certainly coalescing together. They're going to, the shared resources will help. Hopefully they can work together on, whether it be mailing ballots, applications, or advertising, things like that. So it certainly can't hurt.
While we're talking about elections, so much during the redistricting conversations, there was talk about how low voter turnout is in Indiana. A lot of Democrats were saying if redistricting goes through, that they were trying to get more Democrats to go out to the polls. They thought it would kind of raise voter turnout. It did not pass. Redistricting did not go through. But where do you think we go kind of with our voter turnout here in the state?
I mean, Democrats are obviously hoping that this is something that the core base of the party will remember and become enthused about. I think they're using it as an example of what can happen if we don't get our say in the system. Especially in the House, they would need 4 seats to break the Republican supermajority, which just that alone would give them a little more say in different discussions.
Mm-hmm. Do you think they will beat that?
Gosh, I don't know. I mean, usually in the House and Senate, you'll see 1 or 2 seat changes. I mean, net, you'll see 1 or 2 seat difference. 4 in one election cycle is a lot.
Yeah, that would be very interesting. So lots to talk about when we talk about the elections. But we've got more to get to. So coming up, an Indiana lawmaker wants to have an Indiana State Police take over downtown Indianapolis. What the governor thinks of this plan. Plus, the U.S. captures the president of Venezuela and charges him with drug crimes. How an Indiana senator is putting limits on what more the White House can do. But first. Nationwide outcry after an ICE agent shoots and kills a woman in Minnesota. The investigation and how Hoosiers are reacting to the shooting still ahead on Crossroads Politics. Our top national story this week has been shootings involving federal immigration agents. Thursday afternoon, 2 people were shot in Portland, Oregon. Federal officials say agents were trying to stop a car with suspected Venezuelan gang members. The car allegedly hit an agent, and Customs and Border Protection agents opened fire. The mayor of Portland called on all immigration agents to leave the city. Now, that shooting came the day after an ICE agent in Minneapolis shot and killed a 37-year-old mother. Renee Good had moved to Minnesota 8 months ago. She was born in Colorado Springs. The Department of Homeland Security called Good a, quote, domestic terrorist who hospitalized the ICE agent who shot and killed her. But local and state officials in Minnesota are pushing back hard. The mayor of Minneapolis told ICE to get out using an expletive. The governor of Minnesota, former vice presidential candidate Tim Walz, promised the state would investigate. But on Thursday, the Minnesota Bureau of Criminal Apprehension announced the FBI was freezing them out of the investigation, as Gordon Severson reports.
Looking through our video, we can see FBI agents and BCA agents working together, collecting evidence, taking pictures, even going door to door to interview witnesses. During a press conference Wednesday afternoon, elected officials and law enforcement leaders say they were assured that local and federal investigators were working together.
It needs to be done on a local level. With all due respect to the federal level, we do need to make sure that our local agencies are involved.
That's why Hennepin County Sheriff DeWanna Witt was surprised Thursday morning, saying it's, quote, deeply concerning that the BCA is no longer working on the case.
I was extremely disappointed.
Tom Heffelfinger is a former U.S. attorney for Minnesota who was appointed by 2 Republican presidents. He says the federal government taking over the investigation sets a dangerous precedent, and it's not a good look when many are already critical of the federal government's recent actions.
Is there a reason why they would want to remove the state element from it other than control?
Not that I can think of. It does not make the investigation faster. It doesn't make it more transparent. It doesn't make it better.
Hennepin County Attorney Mary Moriarty says her office is trying to find another way to conduct a local investigation. But Heffelfinger says an investigation at this point would be extremely challenging without the cooperation of the federal government.
For example, if Mary Moriarty wanted to interview any one of the federal agents who was at that scene, she's going to have to get the approval and the assistance of Homeland Security, which are the very people that are now doing this themselves.
The shooting has sparked outrage across the country. Here in Indianapolis, hundreds gathered on Monument Circle Thursday night. Logan Gay talked with the demonstrators in downtown about their message.
After Wednesday's fatal shooting of 37-year-old Renee Good in Minneapolis by an ICE agent, Hoosiers in Indianapolis moved quickly to make their voices heard. In the glow of the Christmas tree on Monument Circle, protesters gathered to express their outrage.
Let me be clear about why we are here. We demand justice for Renee Nicole Good. We demand an end to ICE's reign of terror in our communities.
Their messages written on signs and shouted in chants. The U.S. Secretary of Homeland Security, Kristi Noem, said there will be a federal investigation into the shooting, but believes it was justified, saying Good's vehicle was used to hit an officer. But protesters here believe cell phone video shows a different story.
She was in a car. She was simply trying to drive away. The agent was in no danger. I watched the video. I watched it multiple times.
If I'm being honest, I have not slept since seeing the video.
To amplify their message, protesters then took to the streets and marched around Monument Circle.
Everyone's voice matters. We all need to be on the streets and we all need to be voicing our displeasure with this.
And while the shooting didn't happen here, protesters say Indianapolis still has a role in the larger national conversation.
If they will do this in Minneapolis, they will do this anywhere. It could be me, it could be you, it could be your children.
And that's why he says silence isn't an option. In Indianapolis, Logan Gay, 13 News.
Turning now to the big international news story this week, the United States capture of Venezuela President Nicolas Maduro. It started with strikes, targeted strikes around the Venezuelan capital last Saturday. According to Venezuelan authorities, at least 80 people were killed in the strike, but none of them were U.S. military personnel. Their target was Venezuela's authoritarian President Maduro. He and his wife were both captured and flown back to the United States. The Trump administration has accused him of being a drug kingpin. President Trump has also accused Venezuela of stealing oil after the country nationalized its oil industry back in 1976. He now says the U.S. will confiscate Venezuelan oil production.
I'm also meeting with oil companies. Let's go. You know what that's about. We've got a lot of oil to drill, which is going to bring down oil prices even further.
The U.S. has already seized at least one oil tanker heading from Venezuela. Democrats and some Republicans have condemned the operation as unconstitutional. Maduro appeared in federal court in New York on Monday. Lee Waldman reports on reaction here and across the world.
Ousted Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro, flanked by Drug Enforcement Administration agents, makes his way to a New York courthouse. He and his wife, Celia Flores, have pleaded not guilty to felony drug and weapons charges following a deadly U.S. military raid.
I promise you that Maduro's defense lawyers will argue that this arrest violated international law, therefore should be void. I think it's fairly unlikely that a U.S. federal district court judge is going to say, I take issue with the way this arrest happened, and therefore I dismiss the charges.
Outside the courthouse, clashing protests as some celebrate what they see as the end of the Maduro regime, while others condemn the U.S. military action that led to his arrest. A debate echoed in the halls of Congress.
There's been no consultation with the Congress. There's been no authorization of the appropriations funding.
And at a meeting of the United Nations Security Council.
There is no war against Venezuela or its people. We are not occupying a country. This was a law enforcement operation.
Meanwhile, in Venezuela, people face an uncertain future.
We have no idea what our fate will be now with this new situation.
Venezuela's new leader, Delcy Rodriguez, extending an invitation to the U.S. on an agenda of cooperation. U.S. officials say they are working to establish a compliant interim government, prioritizing administrative stability and repairing oil infrastructure.
We want Venezuela to move in a certain direction because not only do we think it's good for the people of Venezuela, it's in our national interest.
In New York, I'm Lee Waldman.
On Tuesday night, protesters gathered here in Indianapolis upset about the capture of Maduro. Our Alex Almanza was there as they called on Indiana lawmakers to stand up to the Trump administration, saying Maduro's capture falls outside of the legal bounds.
It starts with one or two, then keeps growing. That's how this protest on the north side started. Dozens of U.S. Senator Todd Young's constituents showing up in front of his office. While he's out of office in D.C., the message is clear.
He needs to get out there and push back on all these things that are going on, and that's why we're here.
Shortly after Maduro's capture, Senator Young posting on X saying lawmakers need more answers and that he's, quote, eager to work with members of the Trump administration to bring clarity to the situation. These protesters joined others across the country from Chicago to Los Angeles, all demanding state and national lawmakers to stand up to the Trump administration, calling the U.S. attack on Venezuela aggression. But the Trump administration says Maduro had to go. Maduro just pleaded not guilty Monday to federal drug trafficking charges that the Trump administration used to justify removing him from power. But protesters say the administration has gone too far, and they hope their voice is heard in D.C.
Even when it seems like this stuff doesn't work, it does. But it sometimes takes more time than we want.
Across town at another protest, the signs read almost the same.
And if they tried to come up here and invade us and take our president and kidnap him, we would protest like hell. Please stand up against him.
On Thursday, Senator Todd Young broke with the rest of the Republicans in the Senate and voted in favor of a Democrat proposal to require congressional approval for military action in Venezuela. In a statement, Young said he supported the capture of Maduro, but Congress needed to be involved with future action, saying, quote, President Trump campaigned against forever wars, and I strongly support him in that position. A drawn-out campaign in Venezuela involving the American military, even if unintended, would be the opposite of President Trump's goal of ending foreign entanglements. The Trump administration has also returned to a topic from the president's first term, acquiring Greenland. The large island off the coast of Canada is currently owned by Denmark, a close ally of the United States and part of NATO. Denmark has clarified it does not want to give up Greenland, which already hosts a U.S. military base. Administration officials have said the president wants to get Greenland before the end of his presidency. Still ahead, should Indiana State Police take over downtown Indianapolis? We sat down with Governor Mike Braun to discuss the controversial proposal. But But first,
essentially, the mayor would take over all death investigations.
A proposed constitutional amendment could eliminate hundreds of elected positions in Indiana. How it could impact everything from your property taxes to death certificates. Next on Crossroads Politics. Welcome back. Most of what we talk about during the legislative session centers on bills, but a joint resolution introduced in the House could eliminate elections for hundreds of county officials and replace who does their jobs. Everyone from the county treasurer to the county coroner. Jenny Runovich shares the resolution and the reaction to it.
Imagine the Indianapolis mayor in charge of the morgue in Marion County. That's what House Joint Resolution number 2 appears to propose.
Essentially, the mayor would take over all death investigations. Yeah, that's the way that it reads. Not only death investigations, but the duties of the treasurer, the duties of the auditor, and that's just a big job.
The resolution would amend the state constitution and upend county government in Indiana. It calls for eliminating elections for 460 positions across the state. The auditor, recorder, treasurer, surveyor, and coroner in each county, no longer picked by voters as currently constitutionally required. Instead, the resolution would shift responsibility for those jobs to the county executive. So in most, the county commissioner, or in Marion County, the mayor.
Absolute shock. It was like, how's one executive going to do all of the duties of all of these elected officials? We conduct over, just in Marion County, 3,000 death investigations. And as a county executive, is that really possible for the county executive to just simply take over the coroner duties and responsibilities? And I thought not. That doesn't make much sense.
She also worries about losing voters' voices in choosing officials at the ballot box.
My service to the families are the voters, and it's important that they have a say as to who is going to be the qualified person to conduct those death investigations objectively.
The Association of Indiana Counties also concerned, saying this resolution, quote, would remove checks and balances and eliminate voter choice. 13 News reached out to the resolution's author, Republican Elizabeth Rowe Ray, to get clarity on HJR2. She did not grant an interview, but released a statement saying it's about efficiency and flexibility. That this would, quote, give counties the option to consolidate certain duties under the county executive if they choose to do so locally. But county officials say the wording here doesn't match, and they question the reason for the resolution at all.
To lump all of the elected officials into one, total destruction of the Indiana state constitution just doesn't make much sense.
In Indianapolis, Jenny Runovich, 13 News.
You can read the full lawmaker's statement over at WTHR.com. Now, because the joint resolution would amend the state constitution, it would first have to pass the House, then next session pass the Senate, then be approved directly by the voters. So kind of a ways to go on this, but we want to bring back in Nikki Kelly from the Capitol Chronicle. What is the success rate for resolutions like this?
Oh gosh, not very high at all. Obviously, amending the Constitution, and this is, our forefathers set up a very difficult path because they want it to be very deliberative. So it would have to pass this legislative session and then a new legislative session, so in 2027, and then and then it would have to go to the voters. So we're talking several year process. I think that this topic originally came up maybe 2 decades ago now in a report about consolidating government, but it's a big lift to eliminate 5 county elected positions and centralize all that power in either one person, the mayor in Indianapolis, which has a different structure than the rest of the state. In the rest of the state, it would go to the county commissioners.
What would be the pros of doing this if this was to all be consolidated, all these positions?
I mean, I think that remains to be seen. Some people would feel it might save some money. I mean, I assume if, let's say, the county commissioners took it over, they would still appoint a coroner. They would appoint a surveyor. So, I'm not sure that it would actually change the way the offices operated, but it would certainly remove voter feedback if those offices did something they didn't like, and just give them fewer choices in their representation.
So the author said this was about giving smaller counties more flexibility. So do you think this is another response to the impact of last year's property tax reform?
Yeah, I'm not sure it's related to that. Like I said, I think Indiana does have a high number of elected offices, and that's always been something that small government Republicans have been concerned about. This is obviously a big swing, and I think something like this would have to be discussed over a number of sessions before it moved forward.
And you think it would probably work very differently in a larger city versus a more small rural town?
Well, right. I mean, Marion County is unto itself with Unigov, but so how it would work here is way different than how it would work in the 91 other counties. But basically, yeah, instead of voters getting to directly choose those people, the county commissioners would get to choose and appoint those positions.
Well, Governor Braun says he's going to be closely watching another bill, and this one would allow state police to take over downtown Indianapolis from IMPD. Senator Mike Young wrote the bill, which he says would address public safety concerns by creating a special district that includes a special prosecutor appointed by the governor. The city would have the opportunity to negotiate an agreement to work together, but if that doesn't happen, state police would take over all law enforcement duties. Now, earlier this week, our Destin Grove asked the governor whether he supports that.
You'd hope that you wouldn't need to take that kind of step, but I think there's a fairly large consensus around the state and even many who live within Marion County that something's got to change from the dynamic we've currently got.
IMPD says crime is actually down citywide, including a 20% drop last year in criminal homicides. You can watch Destin's full conversation with the governor discussing public safety wins in Indiana on demand here on WTHR+. Nikki, this would be a pretty drastic change for the state to take over the downtown, the capital city. So do you think this is a serious proposal, or maybe some might call it an attack on the Democratic political leadership of Indy?
Yeah, I think it's a continued focus on not liking the the Republican legislature doesn't like the Democrat mayor, doesn't like the Democrat prosecutor. They've been unable to move the needle electorally, get a Republican in those offices, so they're trying another approach. But it would be a massive deal, and I frankly think pretty confusing to have one prosecutor and one police force in charge of a small part of Indianapolis, but another prosecutor and another police force in charge of the rest of it. So, it's pretty thought-provoking.
We got the news this week that there's going to be some change in the mayor's office too. The IMPD police chief, Chris Bailey, is now going to be deputy mayor and chief of staff. Do you think him having that position helps give any sort of influence to whether or not this becomes reality for downtown?
Yeah, I'm not sure that change would have anything really to do with this issue. Like I said, this is honestly about a supermajority of Republicans really not liking the fact that Democrat voters in Marion County keep electing people that they don't like. And so they're trying every different way they can to try to get around that.
All right, well, we've got so much more of this legislative session to talk about, but we got to do it for today. That's going to be all we've got today. So, Nikki, thanks as always for being with us.
Thank you.
And of course, that does it for this week's episode of Crossroads Politics. I'm Jenna Webster for Nikki, Emily, Destin, and everyone here at 13 News. Thanks for watching, and we hope to see you next time.